"I'll pay $1 million to the first person who makes that woman cry." The words exploded across the dining hall like a gunshot. Conversation died instantly. Crystal glasses stopped clinking. Forks froze halfway to mouths. More than 30 mafia capos, advisors and senior officers stared at the head of the 20-foot oak table where Enzo Moretti sat, with one fist pressed against the polished wood. The impact of his hand had rattled every plate only seconds earlier. No one dared breathe. Over the years, they had heard their boss announce executions, billion-dollar acquisitions, political alliances, and declarations of war. Never this, $1 million, for making a kitchen employee cry. Several capos exchanged uncertain glances. Had the boss finally lost his patience? Or worse, had he lost his mind? Enzo's expression revealed nothing. His steel-gray eyes swept across the room with the same icy calm he used before ordering entire criminal organizations erased from existence. "If someone succeeds," he said evenly, "the reward will be transferred immediately." A few greedy faces lit up. Somebody quietly laughed. Others were already imagining how easy the money would be. After all, the target was only a chef, not a soldier, not a rival don, just an overweight woman who had somehow been hired to run the kitchens inside the largest mafia estate on the East Coast. Enzo rose from his chair. Without another word, he walked toward the exit. Only his oldest advisor, Marco Bellini, followed. When the heavy doors closed behind them, Enzo finally stopped. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "If anyone actually succeeds..." Marco looked up. "They answer to me." The old advisor didn't ask questions. He had worked beside Enzo for 22 years. He recognized that tone. Someone had already been sentenced. They just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks earlier, Scarlet Hayes arrived carrying 2 oversized suitcases, one battered recipe notebook wrapped carefully in cloth, and enough optimism to make every guard at the front gate uncomfortable. Most people approaching Moretti estate looked terrified. Scarlet looked impressed. She craned her neck toward the towering mansion. "So," she smiled, "this is either the fanciest workplace in America, or I accidentally walked into a vampire movie." The security guards blinked. One of them couldn't stop himself from laughing. Scarlet pointed at him. "Good. At least one person here still has facial muscles." By lunchtime, half the security team already knew her name. By dinner, she knew theirs. Not because she was trying to impress anyone, she simply remembered people. Officer Daniels liked extra black pepper. Miguel, one of the gardeners, secretly hated onions. A young night guard named Tyler survived almost entirely on coffee because he worked double shifts to help pay his younger sister's college tuition. Scarlet noticed. The next evening, Tyler discovered a warm slice of apple pie waiting beside his coffee thermos. No note, just pie. The following night, there were 2 slices. "You'll fall asleep less miserably," Scarlet had joked when he tried thanking her. Word spread faster than gossip. Within days, drivers mysteriously found homemade sandwiches waiting before long trips. Cleaning staff began receiving leftover pastries still warm from the ovens. Gardeners suddenly had lemonade delivered every afternoon during the summer heat. No announcements, no speeches, no expectations. Scarlet simply believed hungry people deserved food, even if they carried assault rifles. The atmosphere inside Moretti estate shifted so gradually that almost nobody noticed it happening. The kitchen, once silent except for orders and footsteps, became louder. People lingered. They talked. They laughed. Guards who normally ate alone now gathered around the long preparation tables after midnight. Someone always found a reason to stop by the kitchen, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dessert, usually just because Scarlet made the mansion feel strangely normal. She never treated anyone differently. To her, a dishwasher and a capo both deserved breakfast before arguing with the world. One particularly intimidating captain marched into the kitchen one morning after skipping 2 meals during an overnight operation. Scarlet looked him up and down. "You haven't eaten." "I'm busy." She crossed her arms. "So are ambulances." The surrounding cooks burst into laughter. The captain frowned, then reluctantly accepted the plate she pushed toward him. He returned the next morning, and the morning after that. Without realizing it, Scarlet had accomplished something no strategist, politician, or underboss ever managed. She made hardened criminals look forward to breakfast. From the balcony overlooking the courtyard, Enzo watched it all without saying a word. He noticed guards smiling more often. Arguments ended faster. Productivity reports quietly improved. Medical requests related to exhaustion dropped. Even internal disciplinary complaints became less frequent. It made no logical sense. Nothing about his organization had changed. Except the kitchen. One afternoon, while crossing the west corridor, Enzo paused outside an open conference room. Inside, several senior officers laughed among themselves. "I still don't understand why they hired her." "Maybe flour is cheaper when bought by the ton." More laughter. Another voice chimed in. "I've seen armored trucks with better figures." Someone slapped the table. "I give her a month before she quits crying." Enzo remained perfectly still outside the doorway. None of the officers noticed him. Inside the kitchen at that exact moment, Scarlet was teaching 2 teenage apprentice cooks how to braid bread dough. One of them accidentally tangled the loaf beyond recognition. Scarlet examined it thoughtfully. She nodded. "Congratulations! You've invented carbohydrate abstract art." The apprentices laughed so hard that flour exploded into the air. Enzo looked from the joyful kitchen back toward the conference room filled with grown men mocking someone who wasn't there to defend herself. His expression never changed. But something inside him quietly settled into place. The following morning, every capo in the mansion received an invitation to an emergency leadership breakfast. None of them knew they were about to hear the strangest order their boss had ever given. The announcement spread through Moretti estate faster than any security alert. $1 million for making Scarlet Hayes cry. Within hours, every hallway buzzed with whispered theories. Some believed the boss had grown tired of the cheerful chef. Others assumed she had somehow offended him without realizing it. Only Marco Bellini walked through the mansion with the uneasy expression of a man who knew everyone had misunderstood something that would soon become catastrophic. Unfortunately, greed had already taken root. The first attempt came the very next morning. Scarlet opened the pantry and stopped. Every sack of premium flour she had ordered for the day's banquet had disappeared. Instead, the shelves held only ordinary baking flour meant for simple bread. Behind the half-open pantry door, 2 assistant cooks waited silently, eager to hear frustration. Instead, Scarlet blinked once before smiling. Well, she rubbed her chin dramatically. I guess today the universe wants everyone on a carbohydrate budget. The younger cook looked confused. But chef, the menu? She clapped her hands. Then we changed the menu. 3 hours later, guests who expected delicate French pastries received rustic artisan breads, herb butter, roasted garlic spreads, and warm honey rolls fresh from the ovens. The meal became the highlight of the afternoon. Several executives requested the recipes. The assistants stared at each other in disbelief. Attempt number 1 had somehow made Scarlet even more popular. 2 days later, someone secretly poured nearly an entire box of salt into a bowl of cake batter, while Scarlet stepped away to answer a supplier's call. The culprit waited nearby. Surely this would finally work. Scarlet returned,
stirred the batter once, dipped a spoon inside, and immediately grimaced. Oh, she looked around. Either my taste buds just declared bankruptcy, or somebody invented ocean-flavored cake. Several kitchen workers quickly lowered their heads to hide nervous smiles. Instead of yelling, instead of accusing anyone, Scarlet laughed. No problem. She scraped the ruined mixture into another bowl. A few extra ingredients: brown sugar, butter, toasted pecans. Within an hour, trays of salted caramel cookies filled the kitchen with an irresistible aroma. The guards devoured them before dinner. One veteran bodyguard asked for 6 more to take home to his children. Another quietly slipped 2 into his jacket pocket. The guilty employee stared at the empty serving trays in complete defeat. He had tried to ruin dessert. Instead, he had accidentally helped Scarlet invent the staff's new favorite cookie. The failures only made people more determined. After all, $1 million could buy houses, businesses, entire new lives. The next prank was simpler. Someone hid Scarlet's favorite apron. It wasn't expensive, just faded blue fabric embroidered years earlier with tiny sunflowers by her late grandmother. Scarlet searched the kitchen for several minutes before finally shrugging. She grabbed an oversized white apron from the supply cabinet. Looking down at herself, she spun once like a fashion model. "What do you think?" One dishwasher raised an eyebrow. "It doesn't match." Scarlet gasped theatrically. "Oh no." She placed one hand over her heart. "The soup will know." Laughter erupted throughout the kitchen. Even several conspirators couldn't help smiling. By lunchtime, someone anonymously returned the missing apron. No one admitted taking it. Scarlet simply folded it neatly and whispered, "I knew you missed me." Outside the kitchen, the atmosphere was changing in a far more dangerous direction. Every unusual incident landed inside Marco Bellini's morning security report. Every missing ingredient, every sabotage attempt, every witness statement, every hallway conversation. Each report traveled upstairs. Each report ended on Enzo Moretti's desk. He never commented. He simply read, then opened a small black notebook kept locked inside his office. Safe. One name, then another, another. The list grew longer every day. Marco watched silently. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks, he asked, "You're recording every person involved?" Enzo didn't look up. "They made their own choices." Marco hesitated. "Most of them think they're following your order. They're following their greed." The boss closed the notebook. "There is a difference." Meanwhile, Scarlet remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. She believed people were simply having bad days. When a young cook apologized for accidentally knocking over a tray of vegetables, a disaster secretly caused by another employee pushing him, Scarlet immediately helped pick everything up. "Relax," she smiled. "If cooking depended on perfection, restaurants would close before lunch." The frightened young man nearly cried himself, not from bullying, from kindness. Word spread quietly. The chef never blamed anyone, never humiliated mistakes, never shouted. For employees accustomed to fear, the experience felt almost unnatural. Not everyone appreciated the growing warmth inside the estate. Among the mansion's elite visitors, Isabella Vescovi watched everything with cold calculation. She arrived each Friday afternoon, dressed with effortless elegance, always expecting the same routine. Enzo would greet her politely. Their families would discuss business alliances. Wedding negotiations would remain delicately unspoken, but universally understood. For years, everyone assumed Isabella would eventually become Mrs. Moretti. It wasn't a romance. It was strategy. Power recognized power. That was enough. or so she had believed. Then she noticed something impossible. One afternoon, while passing the kitchen doorway, Scarlet accidentally dropped an entire basket of lemons across the marble floor. The fruit scattered in every direction. Before the nearest guard could react, Scarlet threw both hands into the air. "Perfect!" she sighed dramatically. "I've successfully escaped prison." The guard frowned. "What prison?" "Lemon custody." For one full second, silence. Then an unexpected sound echoed through the corridor. A quiet laugh, low, brief, almost disbelieving. Every guard turned toward the source. Enzo Moretti, the man who negotiated wars without changing expression, had laughed. It lasted barely a heartbeat. But Isabella saw it. She saw where he was looking. Not at the lemons, not at the guards, at Scarlet. The chef laughed at her own terrible joke while chasing runaway lemons across the floor, completely unaware she had just witnessed something almost nobody else in the city had ever seen. The boss smile. It disappeared as quickly as it came. His face returned to stone. He continued walking without another word. But Isabella remained frozen. Her perfectly manicured fingers slowly tightened around her designer handbag. A kitchen employee, a plus-size chef. Someone who didn't even realize she was standing in front of one of the most powerful men in America, had done what years of political alliances, luxury, beauty, and calculated charm never could. She had made Enzo Moretti laugh for the first time. Jealousy whispered inside Isabella's heart. Within days, it would become something far darker.
By the third week, the competition for Enzo Moretti's reward had begun to lose its excitement. Not because people had suddenly found their consciences, because Scarlet Hayes seemed impossible to defeat. Every prank became another funny story. Every inconvenience became another recipe. Every insult somehow ended with someone else laughing. The one thing no one could buy with $1 million was her spirit. Yet amid the endless sabotage, someone unexpected started appearing in the kitchen almost every afternoon. His name was Luca Romano. At 28, he was one of the youngest capos in the Moretti organization. Unlike many officers who wore intimidation like expensive cologne, Luca preferred quiet competence. He was respected because he solved problems instead of creating them. The first time he wandered into the kitchen, Scarlet assumed he was hungry. "You look like someone who skipped lunch." Luca glanced at the clock. "I skipped breakfast too." Scarlet sighed dramatically. "You mafia people are hopeless." She pointed toward a stool. "Sit." "I'll save your life," he chuckled. "I wasn't aware my life needed saving." She slid a steaming bowl of pasta in front of him. "It absolutely does. No strategic meeting should begin with low blood sugar." For perhaps the first time in months, Luca ate a meal without answering his phone. He returned the following day, then the day after that. Sometimes he carried paperwork, sometimes security reports, sometimes absolutely no excuse at all. He simply enjoyed the strange peace that seemed to exist only inside Scarlet's kitchen. One rainy afternoon, a power surge shut down several industrial ovens just before dinner. Most chefs panicked. Scarlet looked toward the silent appliances before shrugging. "Well, I've always wanted to find out how much chaos one woman can legally create." Luca rolled up his sleeves. "What do you need?" She smiled. "Can you knead bread? I negotiate with armed smugglers." "That's not what I asked." He laughed. "No. Perfect." She tossed him a flour-covered apron. "Neither can my apprentice." "You'll both learn together." Within minutes, the feared mafia capo stood elbow-deep in bread dough, while Scarlet patiently demonstrated each movement. "No." She gently adjusted his hands. "You fold it." "You don't interrogate it." The kitchen erupted with laughter. Even Luca couldn't hide his grin. By sunset, dozens of warm loaves filled the cooling racks. Scarlet held up one of Luca's badly shaped creations. "It looks." She tilted her head thoughtfully. Confused. He frowned. "It's bread. It's emotional bread. What does that even mean? It hasn't decided what it wants to become." The room burst into laughter again. For the first time in years, several veteran bodyguards admitted they couldn't remember the last time the estate had sounded so alive. Unfortunately, the security cameras remembered everything. Every laugh, every conversation, every shared smile. Each evening, summaries reached the boss. Enzo skimmed through reports with his usual detached expression, until one photograph caught his attention. Scarlet stood beside Luca, both covered in flour. She was laughing so hard she had one hand pressed against the counter for balance. Luca was laughing too. Enzo stared at the image several seconds longer than necessary. Marco noticed. "You've read that page 3 times. I missed a detail." "No," Marco replied calmly. "You missed lunch." Silence. Enzo turned another page. "The Romano Security Division appears underutilized." Marco slowly lowered his reading glasses. "It does? It requires inspection. Immediately? Tomorrow." Marco studied his employer for a long moment. Then he understood. He almost smiled. The next morning, Luca received official orders. 30-day reassignment. Northern security checkpoints. Effective immediately. When the young capo read the document, he frowned. Did something happen? The messenger shrugged. Direct order from the boss. No explanation. No appeal. Scarlet noticed Luca's absence before noon. She expected him for bread practice. Instead, only an empty stool waited by the counter. That afternoon, she encountered Enzo outside the library. He was reviewing contracts while 2 bodyguards followed several paces behind. She hesitated, then spoke. "Boss?" He looked up. "Yes? I wanted to ask something." He closed the folder. "What is it? Did Captain Romano do something wrong?" His answer came immediately. "No." She frowned. Then why was he transferred? A security necessity. She tilted her head. "That's funny." His expression remained unreadable. "Why?" "Because," she counted softly on her fingers, "the gardener who helped me got moved. The driver who defended me got reassigned. Now Luca." She looked at him with genuine confusion. "Why does everyone who helps me suddenly disappear?" For the first time in years, Enzo Moretti had no prepared answer. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Scarlet quickly waved both hands. "Oh, forget I asked. I'm probably connecting imaginary dots." She smiled apologetically before walking away toward the kitchen. Enzo remained exactly where he stood, watching her leave. Marco, who had witnessed the exchange from the opposite hallway, quietly approached. "That," he observed, "could have gone better." Enzo said nothing, because Marco was right. He couldn't explain his decision. Not logically, not professionally, certainly not to himself. The bodyguards, however, needed no explanation. Rumors spread through the estate with astonishing speed. At first, they were whispered, then openly discussed during late-night coffee breaks. One veteran guard leaned toward another. "Notice something strange?" "What?" "Everyone who spends time with Chef Scarlet gets transferred." The second guard nodded slowly, except the boss. Across the table, an older driver snorted into his coffee. "You idiots still think he's protecting the kitchen." "No, he isn't protecting the kitchen. He doesn't like competition." The table fell silent. Someone laughed nervously. "Competition? For what?" The driver raised an eyebrow. "For her attention." Nobody answered, because the idea sounded ridiculous. Enzo Moretti, The coldest mafia boss on the East Coast. Jealous of a young capo helping a chef bake bread? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Yet the transfers kept happening. Meanwhile, Isabella Vescovi watched the changes with increasing alarm. She saw Enzo walking past the kitchen far more often than necessary. She noticed security inspections, somehow always ending near the bakery. She caught him accepting a cup of espresso from Scarlet, without assigning a food taster first. Most disturbing of all, he actually thanked her, quietly. But he thanked her. Years of carefully arranged courtship had never earned Isabella that warmth. A kitchen employee had done it in less than a month. Something inside Isabella hardened. This was no longer an annoyance. It was becoming an obstacle, and obstacles were meant to be removed. Standing outside the kitchen doorway, she watched Scarlet laughing with several cooks, while fresh cinnamon rolls cooled on the counter. Everyone smiled around her. Everyone relaxed around her. For the first time in her life, Isabella realized she wasn't competing against beauty. She was competing against kindness. And kindness was much harder to destroy. She narrowed her eyes. "If I can't make Enzo stop looking at you," she whispered under her breath, "I'll make sure he never wants to again." The plan forming in her mind would not involve childish pranks. It would strike at the one thing Scarlet valued more than her career: her family, her memories, her heart.
The first sign that something was wrong came just after sunrise. Scarlet unlocked the kitchen as she always did, humming softly while placing fresh herbs onto the preparation table. Today was special. She planned to recreate her grandmother's cinnamon apple tart for the estate staff, a recipe she only made on meaningful occasions. Carefully, she opened the small wooden cabinet beside her workstation. Inside rested the worn leather notebook that had traveled everywhere with her for nearly 20 years. Its faded cover was cracked with age. Several pages had stains from butter, flour, and vanilla. To anyone else, it looked old. To Scarlet, it was home. Every handwritten note belonged to her late grandmother. Every correction in the margins carried memories of childhood afternoons spent baking in a tiny family kitchen. She gently ran her fingers across the cover. "Good morning, Grandma," she whispered with a smile. She had no idea someone else was watching. Isabella Vescovi had spent days studying Scarlet's routine. She finally understood something important. The chef didn't care about expensive cookware. She didn't care about luxury. She didn't care about insults aimed at herself. But that notebook, she guarded it more carefully than anything else she owned. That made it the perfect target. Late that afternoon, preparations for an important diplomatic banquet filled the mansion with activity. Chefs hurried between ovens. Servers polished crystal glasses. Musicians rehearsed in the ballroom. Scarlet stepped away from her station for only a few minutes to inspect a shipment of imported cheeses. When she returned, the notebook was gone. At first, she assumed she had misplaced it. She searched every shelf, every drawer, every countertop. Nothing. A faint uneasiness settled in her chest. Then a familiar voice echoed through the kitchen. "Looking for this?" Scarlet turned. Isabella stood near the center of the room, elegantly dressed in cream-colored silk, casually holding the weathered recipe book between perfectly manicured fingers. The kitchen fell silent. Scarlet smiled politely. "There it is." She walked forward. "Thank you." But Isabella didn't hand it over. Instead, she looked at the worn pages with open disdain. "So, this is the famous treasure." Scarlet's smile faded. "Please. It's very precious to me." Isabella sighed dramatically. "I expected something more impressive." With deliberate slowness, she opened the notebook, read one page, then another. Finally. She laughed. These recipes built your confidence? She tore out the first page. The ripping sound sliced through the kitchen like a knife. Scarlet froze. No. Another page. Then another. Thin pieces of paper drifted onto the polished floor like autumn leaves. Several cooks gasped. Nobody moved. Nobody dared interfere. Scarlet took one trembling step forward. Please stop. Another tear. Another memory destroyed. My grandmother wrote those. Isabella's eyes remained cold. Then perhaps she should have taught you dignity instead of desserts. She ripped the notebook in half. The leather binding snapped apart. Hundreds of handwritten pages scattered across the floor. For several endless seconds, nobody breathed. Scarlet slowly knelt. Her hands shook as she reached for one torn page. Butter stains. Her grandmother's handwriting. A tiny handwritten note beside an apple pie recipe. Too much cinnamon makes your grandfather complain. Add it anyway. The words blurred. A single tear landed on the paper. Then another. The cheerful woman who had laughed through every insult, who had smiled through every cruel prank, who had turned sabotage into comedy, quietly cried. The kitchen stood in complete silence. No jokes, no comforting words, only heartbreak. Upstairs, an emergency security alert flashed across Enzo Moretti's private monitor. Target, Scarlet Hayes. Status, emotional distress confirmed. He stared at the screen for less than 1 second, then stood. Lock the estate. Marco looked up sharply. Complete lockdown? Immediately. Across the mansion, heavy security doors slammed shut. Electronic locks engaged simultaneously. Steel gates sealed every entrance. Armed guards took positions without question. Guests stopped walking. Vehicles froze at checkpoints. No one entered. No one left. Confused voices echoed throughout the estate. What happened? Was there an attack? Police? No. Something far worse. The boss had activated full internal containment. Within 5 minutes, every employee, advisor, capo, and guest stood inside the grand hall. More than 100 people waited beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. No one spoke. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doors opened. Enzo Moretti entered. His expression revealed absolutely nothing. Scarlet stood quietly near the back of the room, clutching the torn leather cover of her notebook against her chest. She had tried to stop crying. Her eyes remained red. Enzo noticed immediately. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He walked to the center of the hall. Without greeting anyone, he spoke. Several weeks ago, I announced a reward. Murmurs spread through the crowd. $1 million. Some people suddenly smiled. Perhaps today someone would finally collect it. Enzo slowly looked across the room. I offered temptation. Silence. So I could learn something. Marco pressed a remote control. The massive screen behind them illuminated. Security footage appeared. The first clip showed stolen flour. The second, salt poured into cake batter. The third, Scarlet searching for her missing apron. Then hidden camera footage revealed whispered insults, mockery, sabotage, every face, every action, every participant, date, time, location. Weeks of cruelty unfolded before the entire household. Several employees turned pale. One assistant cook nearly collapsed. Nobody had realized the kitchen itself was protected by dozens of cameras. Enzo had seen everything, every single day. He continued speaking. You believed the reward gave permission. It did not. Another video played, Isabella tearing apart the notebook, Scarlet falling to her knees. The first tear, the entire room watched in horrified silence. When the footage ended, No one could meet Scarlet's eyes. Enzo unfolded a sheet of paper. The following individuals are dismissed from all positions within the Moretti organization. One by one, names echoed through the hall: assistant chefs, security officers, managers, capos, every participant, every accomplice, every witness who encouraged the cruelty. No exceptions. Finally, he reached the last name. Isabella Vescovi. She stepped forward, disbelief replacing confidence. You cannot be serious. Our families have negotiated marriage for years. You'd embarrass my father over a servant? Enzo's gaze remained ice-cold. No, he answered quietly. I'm ending negotiations because you revealed exactly who you are. Her face drained of color. You would choose her? Over an alliance worth billions? For the first time all evening, Enzo looked directly at Scarlet instead of Isabella. Then he answered, I choose character. The words echoed through the silent hall. Two security officers stepped beside Isabella. She finally understood. There would be no special treatment, no political compromise, no second chance. She was escorted from the mansion without another word. Then Enzo did something no one expected. He stepped away from the podium, walked directly toward Scarlet. Every eye followed him. In his hands rested a beautifully preserved leather notebook. Scarlet frowned in confusion. He gently placed it into her trembling hands. She slowly opened the cover. Every page, restored, every handwritten recipe, painstakingly repaired. Even the torn corners had been professionally reconstructed. Fresh archival stitching reinforced the fragile binding. She stared at it in stunned silence. I recovered every page, Enzo said softly. The best conservators in the country worked for 3 days. Scarlet looked up, speechless. He glanced toward everyone gathered in the hall. They believed I offered money to break her. His voice carried effortlessly through the room. I offered temptation. To discover who deserved to remain beside me. Silence filled every corner of the mansion. Then Enzo looked back at Scarlet. For the first time in public, the feared mafia boss smiled without restraint. The strongest person in this estate was never carrying a weapon. He gently touched the restored cookbook. She was carrying a cookbook. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then applause erupted like thunder. Even veteran capos, men who had survived wars and prison, found themselves clapping harder than they ever had for a criminal victory. Because they all understood the truth. The greatest test inside the Moretti Empire had never been about power. It had always been about kindness.
Months passed. The atmosphere inside Moretti Estate no longer resembled the fortress Scarlet Hayes had entered on her first day. The walls were still protected by elite security. The gates still opened only after layers of verification. The organization still controlled billions of dollars in legitimate businesses while quietly ruling the city's criminal underworld. But inside, something had changed. The kitchen had become the heart of the estate, and Scarlet had become the person everyone instinctively gravitated toward. Her title had changed as well. She was no longer simply the head chef. Enzo appointed her director of culinary operations for every Moretti-owned property, overseeing kitchens, employee dining programs, training standards, and food distribution across the organization. Some advisors questioned whether such authority should belong to someone with no mafia background. Enzo answered with a single sentence. She has already accomplished what none of us could. No one argued. They had seen the proof with their own eyes. Under Scarlet's guidance, mealtimes became something entirely new. She introduced one rule that surprised everyone. No reserved dining tables. Not for capos. Not for executives. Not even for Enzo himself. During meals, Everyone sat wherever space was available. On any given evening, a newly recruited security guard might find himself sharing bread with a senior accountant. A mechanic could trade stories with a trusted advisor. Veteran capos, who once commanded rooms through fear, now passed serving bowls to kitchen assistants with polite smiles. At first, the change felt awkward. Then, it became tradition. Scarlet often walked between the tables carrying baskets of warm bread. She remembered birthdays, asked about sick parents, packed extra meals for employees working overnight shifts. Somehow, she still remembered everyone's favorite dessert. Marco Bellini watched the transformation with quiet amazement. One evening, he leaned toward Enzo. "You spent 20 years building loyalty." He nodded toward the dining hall. "She managed it with cinnamon." Enzo almost smiled. "I know. Of course." The boss insisted nothing had changed. Whenever someone asked why he visited the kitchen so frequently, his answer never varied. Routine security inspection. The explanation might have sounded convincing, if he hadn't somehow scheduled those inspections precisely when fresh pastries came out of the oven. The staff noticed. Everyone noticed. Nobody mentioned it. Officially, one crisp autumn afternoon, Scarlet placed a tray of freshly baked cinnamon rolls onto the cooling rack before turning to prepare coffee. The rich aroma filled the kitchen. She stepped into the pantry for less than a minute. When she returned, one cinnamon roll had disappeared. Scarlet looked slowly around the room. Every cook suddenly became fascinated by chopping vegetables. Every dishwasher avoided eye contact. Finally, she spotted the culprit. Enzo Moretti stood near the window, examining a document with perfect composure. One hand remained behind his back. Scarlet folded her arms. "Boss." He looked up. "Yes?" Planning to arrest the baker. Without changing expression, Enzo calmly revealed the warm cinnamon roll hidden behind the folder. "I'm collecting evidence." Scarlet blinked. "What kind of evidence?" He took one thoughtful bite. "The evidence appears delicious." For one long second, silence. Then Scarlet burst into laughter so suddenly that she nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. She laughed until tears formed in her eyes. Several cooks doubled over. The dishwashers laughed. Even the stern bodyguards stationed outside the kitchen door failed to suppress their smiles. One of the oldest capos quietly shook his head. "I've negotiated hostage exchanges with that man. I never imagined I'd watch him steal pastries." Enzo remained perfectly serious. "I confiscated them." Scarlet wiped away tears of laughter. "Without paperwork. I'll complete the report later." "Oh? What will it say?" He looked directly into her eyes. "Evidence requires repeated testing." She laughed even harder before tearing another cinnamon roll in half and handing him the larger piece. "I suppose the investigation should be thorough." It should. For the first time in many years, the feared mafia boss laughed openly. Not because he had won, but because, somewhere along the way, he had stopped needing to. A young recruit standing nearby watched the exchange with disbelief. He quietly asked an older bodyguard, "Is the boss always like this now?" The veteran smiled without taking his eyes off Scarlet and Enzo. "No. He used to believe fear built empires." The recruit looked toward the kitchen, where soldiers, cooks, managers, and advisors now shared coffee around the same table. What changed? The veteran watched Scarlet place another tray of warm bread in the center of the room, before gently scolding Enzo for reaching toward it too soon. His smile widened. "People think the boss built this empire with fear." He paused. "They're wrong." He watched Scarlet hand Enzo another cinnamon roll, despite pretending to be annoyed with him. She taught him something every king eventually has to learn. The strongest kingdoms aren't the ones people are afraid to enter. They're the ones worth coming home to. Outside, the iron gates of Moretti estate remained as imposing as ever. Inside, the coldest empire in the city had become something no rival could ever steal. A family. And the only battle Enzo Moretti was truly grateful to lose was the one that quietly surrendered his heart to the curvy chef who believed feeding people was always easier than fighting them.